Lee Van Cleef names the 7 actors he respected most. Lee Van Cleef was born Clarence Leroy Van Cleef Jr.B. on January 9, 1925 in Somerville, New Jersey. He grew up during the Great Depression, a time that made him strong and taught him to work hard. Before he ever went to Hollywood, he served with honor in the U.S. Navy during World War II, where he worked as a sonar man aboard a minesweeper. His time in the war showed the bravery and self-control that would later show up in his real life and in the characters he played on screen. After coming home from the war, Van Cleef worked for a short time as an accountant and even tried painting, but the pull of the stage was too strong to ignore. Van Cleef's acting career started on the theater stage, where his deep voice and powerful presence quickly got the attention of people who hired actors. His first big chance came when he was cast in a stage show of Our Town, and soon after that he moved into movies. His first movie appearance came in the classic Western High Noon in 1952, where he played one of the quiet, scary gunmen hunting down Gary Cooper's marshal. Even without saying a single word, Van Cleef left a mark people couldn't forget. His sharp face and intense eyes became known as the look of a villain in Hollywood. Throughout the 1950s, he became a face everyone knew in movies and TV westerns, often cast as the outlaw, the gunslinger, or the mean henchman. His roles in movies like The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, The Tin Star, and The Bravados made him one of Hollywood's most trusted bad guys. However, Van Cleef's journey wasn't easy. By the early 1960s, after a bad car accident left him with serious injuries and constant pain, his career struggled. Hollywood seemed to have forgotten about him, and for a while, he was stuck doing small TV parts and cheap movies. But life had different plans. In 1965, the famous Italian director Sergio Leone saw something in Van Cleef that Hollywood had missed: a deeper side and quiet charm beyond the typical bad guy role. Leone cast him opposite Clint Eastwood in For a Few Dollars More, the second film in the now famous Dollars trilogy. Van Cleef's performance as Colonel Douglas Mortimer, a bounty hunter with both toughness and honor, brought his career back to life overnight. People watching were amazed by his mix of strength and complicated morals, and the film's success made him a star around the world. The next year, Van Cleef appeared again with Eastwood in The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly in 1966, playing Angel Eyes, one of the scariest and most unforgettable villains in movie history. With his black hat, cold stare, and strangely calm way of acting, Van Cleef gave a performance that set the standard for the Western anti-hero. The spaghetti Western style of movies welcomed him as one of its top stars. And during the late 1960s and 1970 seconds, he became one of Europe's most popular and successful stars. He went on to star in a bunch of hit westerns and action movies, including Death Rides a Horse in 1967, Day of Anger in 1967, Sabata in 1969, and Return of Sabata in 1971. His success in Europe not only brought his career back but also gave him the respect and fame that had been out of reach for so long in Hollywood. When the cameras weren't rolling, Van Cleef was known as a quiet, private man who cared deeply about his family and friends. Despite the tough, mean characters he played, people who knew him said he was warm, thoughtful, and surprisingly gentle. He loved painting, sailing, and spending time on his California ranch where he could get away from the stress of being famous. He was also a loving husband and father, though his personal life had its tough times, including several marriages and hard periods. Yet, through everything, he stayed humble and thankful for the chances his career had given him. Lee Van Cleef kept acting well into the 1980s, smoothly moving into television and modern action films. His later work included Escape from New York in 1981 and the TV series The Master in 1984, where he played a martial arts expert, a surprising and refreshing role that introduced him to a whole new group of fans. Even as his health started to get worse, he never stopped being dedicated to his work or his love for performing. Lee Van Cleef's personal life, just like his career, was filled with a mix of passion, rough times, and loyal companionship. Over his lifetime, he was married 3 times, and each marriage showed a different part of his journey, from a young man just starting out in the world to an experienced actor who had been through the ups and downs of Hollywood. His first marriage was to Patsy Ruth Call in 1943 when Van Cleef was still a young man in his late teens and hadn't started his acting career yet. Their marriage happened during a crazy time as World War II was happening all over the world and Lee was serving in the United States Navy aboard a minesweeper. Patsy stood by him through his early struggles, giving him a sense of home and stability while he served his country and later changed back into normal life. After the war, when Lee started trying acting in local theater and eventually on Broadway, Patsy stayed a supportive partner. However, as his career started to grow and his time became more and more taken up by his love for performing, the pressure of show business started to cause problems. The couple ended up getting divorced in 1958 after 15 years of marriage. Despite their relationship ending, Patsy had been a really important part of Van Cleef's early years, seeing his change from a Navy veteran into a Hollywood actor. 2 years later, in 1960, Van Cleef got into his second marriage with Joan Marjorie Drain, a marriage that would last for almost 15 years. By this time, Van Cleef's career had gotten a lot of momentum. He had appeared in many westerns and crime dramas and had made himself one of Hollywood's most recognizable character actors. Joan was with him during some of his most important years as an actor, including the time when he changed from supporting roles in American films to international stardom in Europe, especially with the rise of the spaghetti western style. It was during his marriage to Joan that he starred in Sergio Leone's famous films For a Few Dollars More in 1965 and The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly in 1966, which changed him from a familiar face into a legend. The couple shared a busy life together, splitting their time between film sets, travel, and family. However, the demands of Van Cleef's career, combined with the pressures of fame and long times away from home, created growing tension between them. Their marriage ended in divorce in 1974, marking the end of a chapter that had happened at the same time as his greatest work success. 2 years later, in 1976, Lee Van Cleef found love again when he married Barbara Havilone, who would stay his wife until his death. By this time, Van Cleef was in his early 50s and had settled into a comfortable rhythm in his career. Though the crazy energy of his earlier years had calmed down, he was still very much wanted as an actor, appearing in both film and television productions around the world. Barbara brought a sense of calm and friendship to his later years, giving emotional support and stability as he dealt with health problems, including heart problems that would bother him for much of his life. Theirs was a loving and lasting relationship marked by mutual respect and quiet devotion. Barbara often went with him to movie premieres and film festivals where fans celebrated him as one of cinema's most unforgettable faces. Lee and Barbara stayed together until his passing in 1989, and from what everyone says, she was deeply devoted to him during his final years. Their marriage was proof of the peace he found later in life after decades of hard work and personal struggle. Throughout his long and varied career, Lee Van Cleef worked with some of Hollywood's greatest stars and filmmakers. Known for his sharp features, commanding screen presence, and unmistakable charisma, Van Cleef earned his reputation as one of the most memorable figures in Western cinema. But despite often playing tough, silent gunslingers, he was a deeply thoughtful and observant man off-screen. In an honest interview late in his life, Van Cleef thought back on the people who had influenced and inspired him most. "There are 7 actors I truly respect," he said, "not just for their talent, but for the kind of professionals they were, dedicated, real, and honest about their work." Van Cleef started by naming Clint Eastwood, the man who helped redefine his career during the 1960s. "Clint has a quiet strength that you can't fake," Van Cleef explained. "When I worked with him on For a Few Dollars More and The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, I saw a man who let his actions do the talking. He didn't try to steal scenes. He just was the scene. That kind of confidence and calm is rare in this business." Van Cleef credited Eastwood with teaching him the power of doing less in acting, the idea that a single look or pause could show more emotion than a page of dialogue. "Clint showed me that silence could speak volumes," he added, "and in a Western, that's gold." The next on Van Cleef's list was Henry Fonda, whose professionalism left a lasting mark on him. Fonda was the kind of actor who made everyone around him raise their game, Van Cleef said. He never overacted, never showed off. There was always this honesty in his performances, a sort of moral backbone that came through. Even when he played dark characters, Van Cleef admired Fonda's ability to blend holding back with deep emotion, saying, "He reminded me that true acting isn't about shouting louder. It's about making people believe you mean every word." Van Cleef also expressed great admiration for Gary Cooper, whom he called a master of the Western soul. Cooper could stand still in a frame for 30 seconds, say nothing, and still make you feel everything. Van Cleef remembered, "He had that old-fashioned dignity. He didn't need to prove he was the hero. He just was." Van Cleef often mentioned Cooper's High Noon as one of the finest examples of pure character-driven storytelling in American cinema. That picture said everything about courage and loneliness in the West, he said, and Cooper carried it all on his shoulders without ever breaking a sweat. Another name on Van Cleef's list was Charles Bronson, whom he admired for his toughness and humility. Bronson came from nothing, a tough upbringing, and he never forgot it, Van Cleef said. He had that steel in his eyes, that truth that only comes from real struggle. When you saw him in a role, you believed he'd lived it. Van Cleef and Bronson shared a mutual respect as two men who rose to stardom later in life, often after years of being cast as villains or supporting players. We understood each other, Van Cleef thought back. We knew what it meant to earn every inch of respect we got. He also spoke warmly of Eli Wallach, his co-star in The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Eli was a powerhouse, Van Cleef said with a grin. You could never outwork him, never outhink him. He'd come to set knowing every detail of his character's life, where he was born, what he ate for breakfast, everything. He taught me that a good actor doesn't just play the part, he becomes it. Van Cleef said Wallach's sense of humor and intelligence brought balance to even the darkest scenes. He was the spark that kept the movie alive, he added. Among his 7 respected peers, Van Cleef included John Wayne, despite their differences in acting style. Duke was larger than life, he said. He had his own way of doing things and it worked. Some people called it old-fashioned, but to me he represented a kind of American legend. He carried the West in his stride, though they never developed a close friendship. Van Cleef deeply respected Wayne's unwavering work ethic and his loyalty to the genre that made them both famous. He never pretended to be anyone but himself, Van Cleef noted, and that's something rare. Lastly, Van Cleef mentioned Yul Brynner, a name that might surprise some fans. Yul was elegance and danger all rolled into one, he said. He could walk into a room and command it without saying a word. I respected that. He brought sophistication to the Western, showed that a gunslinger could have mystery and class. Van Cleef admired Brynner's stage discipline and his ability to shift smoothly between film and theater. He had that royal bearing, he said. He made the cowboy look like... Thinking back on his list, Van Cleef summed up his admiration simply. What I respect most in an actor is truth. Doesn't matter if you're playing a hero or a villain. If people believe you, then you've done your job. These 7 men, he said, showed that truth every time the cameras rolled. They were not just actors he respected. They were reminders of the kind of realness he spent his own career chasing. And in that sense, Van Cleef's list of 7 wasn't just a tribute to others. It was a quiet reflection of the kind of man he was. Van Cleef passed away on December 16, 1989, at the age of 64 from a heart attack made worse by throat cancer. His death marked the end of an era for classic Western cinema. Yet, his legacy lives on in the countless actors and filmmakers he inspired and in the lasting power of his performances. Today, Van Cleef is celebrated not only as one of the most important faces of the Western genre, but also as a man who rose from near obscurity to become a legend of international film. His journey from a small-town New Jersey boy to a Hollywood icon respected across continents remains one of the most remarkable stories in cinema history. Van Cleef's memory lives on every time his tough gaze flashes across the screen. He was more than just the bad guy. He was a master of subtlety capable of revealing vulnerability behind the gunfighter's mask. His artistry, professionalism, and resilience continue to inspire actors who dream of bringing depth and authenticity to their roles. In every sense, Van Cleef remains a symbol of cinematic strength, a man whose life and legacy still shine brightly in the history books of film.